Like a lot of other kids liking strong male role models, I gravitated towards superheroes at a very young age. Something about the tights and the colors and the tights scratched an itch deep within my adolescent brain. See, you watch Spider-Man and you think it's out of your system, but then you get a taste of Justice League Unlimited, and by the time you hit Batman Beyond, well, it's already too late. I've been watching and reading comic book stories for almost 2 decades, and I'd imagine that it's had an effect on me. That's why today, as someone who struggled a lot with mental health and particularly masculinity throughout my lifetime, I'm going to be looking at what and how superhero movies are telling us about mental health, and see if I can find something new to blame for the way I am. To start out with, I'm only going to be looking at movies because they're more widely watched and TV shows are long. I will, however, not be looking at superhero media that is explicitly dealing with mental health, like Moon Knight or Thunderbolts. No, I'm more interested in what we're being told implicitly, as I think that's having a broader and more subtle effect on us. Additionally, I am not going to be watching flagship character films, as I see movies like Iron Man and The Dark Knight more as blockbusters that happen to have comic book characters in them rather than comic book movies.
Where's the dog?
It's like Old Boy versus Old Boy. You get it? You get it. Let's get started. Right off the bat, I'm going to contradict the very rules that I just laid out by looking at Captain America: Civil War. Not just because an incredible number of people watch this movie, but because there's an equal amount to dig into, especially when it comes to masculinity and grief. You see, this film has not one, not two, but 3 different male characters, each trying to kill someone because that person killed one of their parents. That's basically all you need to know about the plot. Now, obviously, this film's target demographic of young boys probably aren't dealing with anything quite so serious, but it's worth acknowledging that this film presents multiple men turning immediately to violence the very second that they're wronged. In fact, the film kind of frames it as the only sensible thing to do. In fact, the film kind of makes it look downright cool.
Don't bother Miss Romanoff. I'll kill him myself.
In all fairness, for many of this dense film's many conflicts, characters do attempt to solve them verbally, but only for the briefest of moments before throwing fists. Though, oddly enough, none of these men actually succeed in their murder-revenge quests. I think this is because, if they did, the filmmakers would be allowing the audience to reckon with the inevitable consequences of fulfilled revenge. Regret. Discourse over the merits of revenge has been discussed in popular media for over 2,000 years. In The Ethics of Retaliatory Violence and Athenian Tragedy, William Allen writes, Athenian tragedy shows that the determination of punishment, or revenge, does not lead to the best outcome. Yet, it is an essential part of the heroic world that vengeance is personalized. Tragedy depicts revenge as problematic, but it also offers a more positive alternative to personal violence, which does justice to the emotional and social needs of its audience. In other words, what Allen is saying is that Athenian tragedy plays allowed their heroes to experience the catharsis of fulfilled revenge, as well as the immediate emptiness and regret that inevitably follows. Why can't Marvel do this? Why are its characters ham-fistedly precluded from accomplishing their flawed goals and facing the consequences, at least one of the 3 of them? This is where we start to bump up against the constraints of the genre. Marvel won't show the unvarnished weight of what its characters are trying to do because that would mess up the wacky, fun, madcap tone. Imagine if Black Widow couldn't stop T'Challa with her little taser thing. Not only would T'Challa have to reckon with the fact that killing Bucky didn't solve anything, he later realized that he killed the wrong man. That's a very different and, I would argue, more interesting movie, but it's not one Marvel would ever make because they have a bottom line to preserve. In all fairness, Marvel does try to do this with Thor in Avengers Endgame after he kills Thanos, but then they're forced to turn him into a punchline to preserve the tone.
Is he asleep?
No. I'm pretty sure he's dead.
In fact, they portray him as a wimp, stripping him of his traditional masculine characteristics because apparently masculinity is completely incompatible with sorrow and regret. What is it telling young men that a defining masculine characteristic for their superhero idols is to be constantly seeking revenge but never facing consequences? That's just the MCU though. They've got their own stuff going on. we can't take them as a representation of a whole genre. So that was the men's side of things. Let's see what comic book movies have to offer women. Very little. Since the 80s, out of over 100 live-action American superhero comic book movies, only about 10 have had a female superhero receive top billing. And one of those movies is Birds of Prey, which follows Harley Quinn right after she's dumped by the Joker as she sets out to discover her identity separate from him. Now, no analysis of this film would be complete without acknowledging the elephant in the room: Suicide Squad.
What?
You see, in Suicide Squad, Harley Quinn has basically no character. She's a creepy smile, a few bad lines,
A whole lot of people are about to die.
and absolutely nothing else, wrapped in booty shorts and a crop top. That's why this film exists, to untangle Harley Quinn from the Joker and reclaim her on screen just as she was in the comics. The point is to show girls that it's okay to be sad and drive recklessly and eat Cheez Whiz right out of the can, all while still being cool and whatnot. Nothing groundbreaking, but for superhero movies, it kind of was. Prior to this, women in superhero films were either leather-clad badasses or bland love interests. This film uses Harley's mania as a heightened representation for liberated womanhood. It's also trying to validate the grief process, and while it's not a deep dive into depression or Harley's issues, it is a good look at short-term mental health crises, finding a supportive community, and finding comfort in one's true self. That being said, I think this film does a massive disservice to its audience by forgetting that Harley's relationship to the Joker was definitely abusive.
But Puddin', I don't understand. Don't you want to finally get rid of Batman?
Only if I do it, idiot!
In fact, a core part of her character is that she is drawn to toxic, abusive men. In many of her comics, Harley's arc is about learning to love herself rather than leaning on the fleeting affections of narcissists. By glossing over Harley's toxic relationship to the Joker in Birds of Prey, the filmmakers risk trivializing it. In fact, they're doing something very similar to Civil War. Just like that film, they're diluting something serious and denying their audience an emotional catharsis in service of tone. Because, after all, if they really delved into these themes, it would bring down the mood. Or would it? This is where the Harley Quinn show actually excels. It manages to actually redefine Harley outside of her relationship to the Joker, directly call out his toxicity, and remain funny throughout.
Wayne Tech promised an electric car by this year. I put a deposit down. Where's my goddamn electric car, Bruce?
Damn, I broke my own rules again to talk about a TV show. I'm sure that'll be the last time I do that. Anyways, next up, we're going to talk about a film following a little-known character, and it's called Spider-Man 2. While many flagship superhero sequels tend to be defined by their villains, Spider-Man 2 stands apart as being very much defined by its hero. The film follows Spider-Man at the very end of his rope. He's late to class, late to Mary Jane's play, and even late to his own birthday party. Not just that, but his powers are beginning to wane at the worst possible moments. You see, in my mind, Peter Parker is a textbook case of PTSD. He's experienced an extremely traumatic event at a crucial time in his development. He's haunted by recollections or flashbacks of that event, and now it's beginning to impair his functioning. In fact, it's not until Peter takes a break from being Spider-Man and takes care of himself that his powers actually return, hence why his powers are failing. PTSD has created a mental block within our protagonist. Or at least that's my best prognosis. You see, the film cannot explicitly talk about this. We can read his powers failing as a trauma response, but that's only with a lot of external research and a bit of guesswork. This film could, for example, show Peter going to therapy, working on himself, but instead he can only focus on his schoolwork and have a hot dog. It would seem that the filmmakers are, again, unwilling to deal with the mental health issues already present in their own text for the sake of wide appeal and commercial viability. Maybe we can generalize off the MCU. Okay, so I actually broke all the rules that I, myself, laid out. I looked at a TV show, 2 blockbusters, and one of them starred Marvel's most popular character. Why? Well, because I relate to them. A lot. All my life, I've struggled with masculinity and how to express my emotions. For years, I watched my mother languish in an abusive relationship with a narcissist because it would hurt more to leave than come to terms with why she was there. And even before I, myself, struggled with mild PTSD in 2024, I had often felt like whatever I do, wherever I go, that I'm always behind, always failing, and utterly debilitated. That was the power of superhero media for me. It was the one genre where the very most broken people could do the very most good. But upon further recollection, I realized that while this media definitely let me feel seen at turbulent points in my life, it could have been so much more. If T'Challa or anyone else in Civil War was allowed to make a mistake, if Harley Quinn was allowed to reckon with how she was treated by the Joker, and if Spider-Man was allowed to acknowledge that his struggles were deeper than just what's on the surface, these movies could have taught me and a lot of other kids some very important stuff about ourselves. This is where some superhero films excel. Movies like Iron Man 3, The Suicide Squad, and even the Lego Batman movie deal in no uncertain terms with issues of mental health. The Lego Batman movie looks at how men process grief. The Suicide Squad analyzes Harley's drawn towards toxic men, Polka Dot Man's childhood trauma, and a bunch of other stuff. And Iron Man 3 deals directly and realistically with Tony's PTSD. These films, however, were sadly underwatched or maligned for being boring. I said before that we were running afoul of the genre's constraints, but that's a two-sided coin. These constraints exist because, time and again, audiences have told studios that they're adverse to superhero movies delving deep. That's just not what the genre's for, according to many. Every year, several superhero films run the circuit of culture. A film is released, dissected, and studied before the next one gets churned out. This year specifically, we've seen a number of more nuanced superhero films dealing with serious issues that, while not flopping, have definitely underperformed. It would seem that right now, as studios are attempting to show deeper, more layered portrayals of superheroes, some audiences are rejecting them. It won't be long before studios respond with a new wave of vapid superhero flicks, too wacky and lighthearted to even hold a narrative. And honestly, I think that'll do the most harm to superhero movies' target demographic. Young people. Today, kids are almost challenged to find anything of substance within the media they're fed. I'm honestly not sure how I would have turned out without my silly superhero stories. But to be honest, that's only one piece of the puzzle. This isn't even touching on the comics that inspired these films, and in the future, I hope further research and reflection are done into presentations of mental health in comics, as well as the reader's perceptions about them. Thank you.